I know. I feel. Oh, gee, and we are live on Oz Property Investor. We bring the big names, and we have the big fun. And today, that was a very quick. My internet's on fire today. Gee, what's going on? How you going anyway, Melissa? What's happening?
Hi, thanks for having me.
You are very welcome. No, thank you. And I remember listening to a podcast with you, probably about 3 years ago, and I was like, this person seems like that. I'd very much enjoy having a conversation with this person about their property journey. So I thought, let's get you on to have that conversation. So, but how are you going, Joe? How was your trip up to Queensland? Have you gotten back on time yet? Are your clocks still behind?
It's only an hour, so I am now in Sydney. But I'm pumped for this session. Mel, you've done incredibly well with property over the years, and you've had a number of stumbles and hurdles along the way. But ultimately, you just kept going, and you've kept going and kept going and kept going, and it's resulted in some awesome results. And I'm excited to share. For you to share your journey of how you got to where you are now and some of those challenges. I'm pumped for it. But yeah, my day was good. My week was good. I spent the last 5 days in Brisbane and checking out Logan and Moreton Bay and Brisbane surrounds. And it's amazing up there. Like, there is a lot of potential up in, like, everyone poo-poos on Logan, and I struggle to understand it. There are definitely pockets where you should not be putting money, but it's literally 25-30 minutes away from Brisbane City. I'm very, very bullish on Logan, but we can have a bit of a deep dive on that a little bit later. But how are you, Jeff? How are you, mate?
Yeah, I've upgraded my shirt. It looks like I've I don't think I've ironed it, but no. So it was a venture to the office. So I think I spent more time traveling by train today than what I did actually working. So I'm excited for that to finish. Big news coming on that eventually. These are some of the behaviors and some of the habits that have made you such a successful property investor. So thanks for joining us.
That's okay. You'll just have to excuse that I don't look at you a lot because my camera is all the way down the bottom of the laptop.
That's okay.
I've seen those laptops, and that like at work they used to have theirs on their Zoom, and it's like, can you just pay attention? No, I am paying attention. It's just I'm not. Camera is not paying attention.
Yeah.
What is your quote of the week, Mel?
So it's a John McGrath quote, and it's the things that you don't get to that make you tired, not the things that you do get to in a day. And I always love that quote because it's I get energized from the things that I do. So it's really, if I have a day where I'm not productive, that's the day that I feel the most tired.
Yeah. It's interesting you say that because I'm quite similar. Like I've got a list sometimes of 10 to 15 things I've got to do, and it's where I haven't ticked any of that off. I'm like, oh great, like what have I actually achieved? What have I moved forward down the what ball have I moved down the field today? So yeah, no, I feel like I've heard that one from on a podcast recently. Maybe it was even from John himself on the $1 Million Agent. So I listened to those guys, Tommy Panos and that other guy, what's his name? The Roosters player, Trent. No, what his name is. But yeah, that's a great quote. And should we jump into? We'll jump into the sponsor, Joe, and then we'll introduce the person before us, the person of the hour, and the lady who's been doing property for 2 decades. So you look far too young to have been doing property for 2 decades. So I'm excited to hear all the wisdom that you've gained from those 20 years.
Do it.
2 decades.
Commercial property offers the highest cash flow in Australian property investing, offering exceptionally higher yields than residential. Now, we're talking 8 to 10% net yields. That's cash after all expenses, not this 2 to 6% gross that we see in the residential space. So for those that are starting out on their commercial investing journey, it can be exciting, but it's also a step not to be taken lightly. The expertise of a commercial buyer's agent can pay dividends to help you secure that high cash flow and high growth potential property. And this is why we recommend Steve Polisi of Polisi Property. With over 6 years experience in the space, Steve has over 1,200 property transactions under his belt. He has seen it all and knows the best locations right for growth. In a previous life, Steve was a chartered mechanical and structural engineer, so he draws on his mathematical and analytical skills that he's developed to break down what works best in commercial property. As with engineering, same goes with commercial property. It's based primarily on the numbers. So if you're curious about diversifying into commercial property, you have access to $100,000 in cash or in equity, book a call with Steve today and find that perfect asset for you.
Here we go. Thanks for running that, Joe. So I can see there's a lot more light.
Yes. Turn the light on.
Yeah, no, that's fair enough.
And I've reversed the laptop, so now instead of looking down, I'm looking up.
Wow, I just love that ingenuity. Like, how good is it? Like, if that happened to me, I'd be sort of potentially throwing soft animals around the room. Maybe not.
You have soft animals.
No, not soft animals. Soft toys. Soft animal toys. Not. Yeah. But anyway,
who have we got here? Who have we got here, Jeff?
So we have Melissa. So you a lot of people would already know, particularly if you invested in property in Sydney, they would have seen you out and about at a networking function, or even sort of on a forum here or there. But you are the principal of Progressive Property, which I saw as a really fantastic boutique property management firm, and I love my boutiques, ones that sort of really go the extra mile, and you've got with that you bring over 2 decades of property investment and development experience. So you've done many deals in your time, and that's why I'm excited to hear. And you also enjoy a fast car or two, for those who may have seen a post or two. So I certainly appreciate your great taste in cars. So so thanks for joining us. And that's you've done renos, you've done developments, you're a property manager extraordinaire as well. So what have we missed, though, Melissa? Is there anything I missed out there that you'd like to share with the audience?
No, I guess I'm also a mum of 2 girls, 2 young kids. So that also keeps me busy. And at the moment I'm juggling between the business and 2 projects.
Wow.
Oh, wow.
And trying to work on my work-life balance and try and enjoy life a little bit.
Yeah, I struggle with that too, because the thing I find is, like, I just, even tomorrow where I've got the day off, I'm like, what am I, like, I just struggle to sit still. Like, there's many things I can do, but I'm like, I should enjoy the day and just not think too much about the stuff that I could or should be doing. But yeah, so work-life balance for me, I think it's more about just a life balance, like actually sort of saying, well, what are the things that are really important to me, and things that give me energy. So, but
I think
it's about having a choice. The main point. To
exactly.
do what you love, and not have to go to work if that's not what you want to do.
Yeah, I kind of want to hear about these 2 projects, but am I putting the cart before the horse, show, or should we save that till later? Should we hear about the cart project
from the beginning?
Okay, I want to hear, exactly. I want to hear about the hard stuff, because now you've advanced on and you've been doing incredibly well. But I want people to be like, who are at where you were 15, 20 years ago, getting started, and how did that kind of look? And can you kind of set the scene for back in the day? We always like to ask, what was your first property purchase? But can you kind of set the scene for the environment from what it looked like from a macro perspective? Because right now we're at interest rates of 2.85, just gone up because of the RBA. But a year ago they were at 0.1. But I imagine back when you were investing, started your first journey was 5, 6, 7, 8%. There's crazy numbers. Can you set the scene a little bit for us?
Sure. So the year was 2000. So it was 22 years ago. The GST had just been introduced. I was 18, and we thought, well, my parents encouraged me. So they said to me, hey, Mel, you should go and get the first homeowners grant. They introduced that when they did the GST.
Yep.
So I'd seen an area called Potts Point, quite close to inner city Sydney, and I could buy a studio there for about $130,000.
Wow.
So they were like, hey, why don't you just go and buy it? The $7,000 will assist. You can live there for a while, get you out of the house. And it sort of made great sense to me. And I bought my first property for $105,000.
How did you go with the
Wow.
lending? Because so you're saying studio, was it above the sort of 45 square meter, or was that an issue back then with lending?
It was. So it was 24 square meters.
Yep.
And I actually had a part-time job with a mortgage broker at the time, just doing admin. And they said, sure, go, we'll be able to get you the loan. Then they actually struggled. They got to a point where the lender had said, well, it's below 40, we can't do anything. The real estate agent said, go down the road to St. George and the branch manager there will help you. So
Wow.
interestingly, I walked down the road and the branch manager sat me down, went through all my numbers and went pretty much, yep, your loan's approved.
Wow.
That harkens back to the, I was going to say, where your local branch manager used to do that, and even when I was sort of getting into around the sort of late 2000s, I sort of you could still do somewhat like that, and I was like, whereas now, I mean, a sort of up and coming, like a budding property investor, I go to a local branch manager and they'd be like, what are you doing in my branch? Like, this is why we have, I mean, they do have mobile lenders and all that sort of stuff,
Yeah.
but yeah. That's
Not the same, is it? Yeah, and it was because that area had so many studios and smaller properties. The bank manager had seen all those day in, day out, and you knew that they were, I mean, the reason the banks don't lend is because they're higher risk, or they perceive to be higher risk. But the branch manager had that familiarity with that market and knew that it really wasn't. It was sort of the bread and butter of that area.
Yeah, wow.
Yeah, if he wanted to have his business run, he's going to have to start accepting those assets, right? Otherwise, he's not going to get half the amount of loans that he normally could.
Yeah, so it was a great stepping stone. And I actually, for $110,000 that year, I bought an apartment and a car, an RX-7. And
Wow.
and now the car has gone up so much, it's almost $100,000.
Wow. Do you still own it?
No, I've bought about and sold about 20 cars since.
Oh.
Wow, $100,000 for an RX-7. Jesus.
Was that one? Was it a vintage? Oh, I mean, yeah. I feel like we go to the
Yeah, it
rabbit
was
hole.
1985 model. And now they're really popular, and everyone my age has grown up and got nostalgic and has got the money, so they've gone back to try and buy them.
Yeah, wow. And they say that cars don't appreciate that. I mean, some of those vintage cars can, or sort of more sought after.
They're an asset. They're an asset, like any other asset class, I guess. So was it that easy for you? Like, was it just $7,000 first home buyer grant, studio apartment? Was it super easy? Were there any kind of interesting stories along the way? Or did it start to get a little bit more exciting on your next purchase and your subsequent purchases after that?
So this first property actually catapulted my property management journey without me realizing. So I lived there for a little while and I really didn't enjoy it. It was a tiny little room, about the size of a bus, right? And it looked into a light well, which was a hole where people threw their rubbish, essentially. And it smelled like pizza the whole time because there's a pizza shop downstairs. So I lived there a while and I was like, no, this isn't for me. I'm going to tenant it and move out. And my first property manager stuffed up so badly, I ended up at tribunal at 19.
Wow.
And they'd even gone, like I left my fridge and microwave there when I moved out, and those tenants had gone and pawned them down at the local pawn shop. And I had to go and buy my own appliances back.
Well, that's yes. So they didn't do the appropriate screening checks to sort of see that these people were able to sort of were good tenants or quality tenants.
Yeah, and they'd also left the arrears so long that they hadn't, by the time we went to tribunal, they were something like 11 or 12 weeks behind when they really shouldn't have gone to that point at all.
Yeah, but it's you that has to pay it because you're the investor.
Yeah. And I got to a point where I was like, well, I'm going to manage my own properties from here on. I think I can do a better job than what's happened so far. And so since I was 19, I ended up managing sort of all my own Sydney properties. So it really was the start of the property management.
Wow. And do you still own that property?
No. So I sold that a couple of years later. I'd done a cosmetic reno and the market had actually gone up in the early 2000s. And I sold it for $165,000. So it was a really good growth in a couple of years.
Wow.
That's close to, that's about sort of 40% growth, roughly.
Yeah.
What did you buy it for? 120?
105.
105. Okay. Yeah, there you go.
So it was great because that released some of the funds for me to go and buy a bigger property. And in the meanwhile, I'd actually gone to Brisbane and bought another property in Brisbane in 2001.
Wow. So
Why Brisbane? Why the jump to all the way up there when you're living in Sydney?
So I went up there to see a friend, and I just happened to, keep an eye on the property as you do. And I went, wow, these properties, like I bought a little 36 square meter 1-bedroom. I paid $97,000 for it, and it was renting for $170. The returns were amazing in Brisbane in early 2000s in the inner city market. And I just went, well, this sort of makes sense. If I can afford it, why not?
Yeah. How did the loan for the second property up in Brisbane go? Did you go to that same branch manager at St. George, or
No, so I actually couldn't afford it. I had to borrow some money from my parents
yeah.
for the deposit. And they said to me, but why do you want another property? You already have one. And so I kind of had to talk them into why, I wanted to do it. And they lent me the deposit and the stamp duty. And then I think I went to the same bank, but I don't think it was the same branch manager. I think things had started changing and the branch manager was sort of, not so prevalent anymore. But I did go through, I think it was St. George for that loan as well. And 36 square meters was a little bit better than 24. So they were okay with that.
Wow. So what did you mentioned there your sort of parents had that, or sort of, I'm just interested to sort of unpack some of that, because your parents said, why do you want a second property? You've already got one. Where did you get the property investment bug from? Like if it wasn't, was there other influences, or where'd you get that from?
So I think the penny actually dropped for me as I was sort of living in the studio. I could see values rising. I, could see, I was just getting more and more interested in property, really. And so I started reading. I read a lot of those early books, Jan Summers, Myra Lomas, and I was getting the train into work every day. And the more I was stuck on public transport, the more I read, because it was just a good distraction. So I really got sort of interested in wealth creation and using property as a means of getting to that wealth. So I think it sort of clicked for me, even though I was 19 or 20 at the time, that if I bought another property and the returns were good, I was would help me onto my way.
Wow. Yeah, that's really for anybody sort of watching at home and sort of thinks, yes, these properties were $100,000, but at that time, $100,000 was a good chunk of change. So I hope there's some young budding property investors who may have sort of have not bought their first property, or just have one or two, and are like, hopefully they're sort of soaking that all in, just sort of saying, like, sort of thinking about their education and sort of getting into property. So what were you doing in work? What was your job while you were bought these first ones?
So I was working at Macquarie Bank. I did an IT degree, and I didn't like IT that much anymore. So I decided I wanted to work for a corporate company. So I went to Macquarie in operations, and then I asked them to move me into real estate, into their property division, because by that point I'd been bitten by the property bug, and I really wanted to sort of further my career in property. So I spent 2 years in their margin lending, investment lending division, and then 3 years in their property area in prudential and compliance, which was interesting because it gave me a lot of oversight into large property developments and sort of how corporate sort of viewed property, but it wasn't actually what I wanted out of a career.
So what was your, if you don't mind me asking, what was your salary at that on that job, just to give a bit of comparison to what salaries are now versus what property is now as well? It'd be cool to see if you remember. I don't even know what mine was.
My graduate salary was $38,000. I have no idea what it is these days.
That's pretty good back in the early. Yeah, that's. I mean, given that if you go to an accounting firm now, one of the big four accounting, Deloitte, KPMG, some of those salaries are roughly around that still. Like you're probably on about 50 or 55. So $38K for a graduate back in sort of mid 2000s. Pretty good salary.
It is the Millionaire's Factory. I was shocked I wasn't getting $1 million to start.
Yeah. Well, I mean, I've spent a bit of time at Macquarie myself, and the Millionaire's Factory. If I had $1 for every time somebody said, "Oh, a million," I'd actually probably be a millionaire now.
What's a Millionaire's Factory?
It's just a nickname for the company.
Because they paid out ridiculous bonuses, did lavish parties, and haven't you heard that, Joe? Like, and then it all stopped after the GFC. So pre-GFC,
When everyone
was like,
ran out of money, they're like, we should slow this. We should slow this.
Well, they
slow
just
this down just a little bit.
It's kind of like, it was an interesting place. I imagine it would have been, and I've heard stories of. But yeah, let's. I don't know. I could sort of keep talking about this because I kind of want to know more. It's like a journey. I feel like I'm getting to really know your property journey. So I don't know. Maybe should we just continue, Joe, or should we talk property?
What it's for? That's what we're here for, Jeff. That's what it's all about. What is the property journey?
Okay. All right. Okay. We're going to sort of divert a little bit from the pre-notes.
So how did you progress? That's the question I want to know. How did you get from buying 1-bedroom and studio bedroom units? What was the light bulb moment that said, you know what, we can do this, we can make more? And then what was that more?
So I suppose I went into a bit of a diversification strategy. I went into Logan before Logan was probably even a thing. And bought a house in Eagleby in 2005, really early on.
Yep.
I started reading about, I had an income that I wanted to sort of, use negative gearing. I went into looking at depreciation because I bought a fairly new house. So I really was into diversifying, going from a higher cash flow but smaller property into a property with a bit of land. So, there was a bit more potential for growth down the track. And moving into interstate to sort of diversify, move away from land tax, and also sort of have a bit of that diversification in different types of property assets. So I ended up buying a couple of houses over the subsequent years. Then I thought, well, I'll go back to doing a bit of reno because that first property went pretty well with a cosmetic reno. So I sort of did a few of those. And then I quit my job at Macquarie and thought I'd be a buyer's agent. So again, really early on.
What was the time that you what was the time you were looking at buyer's agency in yes?
So I think it was about 2012.
Wow. Because I don't really, there might have been one or two, the bigger ones. You had the Right Property Group, which is still coming around. And I think Nathan Birch was just starting up with Be Invested back then. I hope that's right. But yeah, I don't really know. And I know Margaret Lomas had your I'm trying to remember, Destiny Financial. But aside from those sort of bigger names, I don't think buyer's agent was very, very trendy back then.
No.
How'd you fall into buyer's agent work?
So I actually didn't enjoy it too much. I thought
it's not easy.
I thought I would quit my job in corporate and go and help people buy property and uncover these amazing investments. But ultimately, I found myself chasing leads, trying to sell a dream to someone that may not be so sold on it. But at that time, they had a property management division. So it actually showed me that I actually wanted to lean towards property management more.
What type of products were you selling?
So it was existing properties in blue chip areas. So it aligned very well with my existing strategy. And actually, the first day for my interview, the director said, "Oh, you've got at the time about 7 properties." And they said, "How many were bought off the plan?" And I said 0. And they basically said, "Great, you're hired."
Ticks out. You're not a spook.
Does tick our box. Does tick our box. Don't buy off the plan. That's the rule. Rule 1. Rule 2 is don't buy house and land.
Yeah, and if you've got 7 already, they're like, what you're doing must be working, and you're only in your 20s.
Yeah, wow.
Yeah. Any 20-year-old that's got 7, you're in good stead.
Yeah.
Not quite 20. I think I was probably, I don't know.
20s.
Late 20s by then, nearly 30.
But so you said you picked up, there was the 2 studios and a couple in the sort of Logan area. How did you decide to pick the parts of Logan to invest in? What were the metrics that you were looking at back then?
So I was pretty young. I really picked up Australian Property Investor magazine, read it from cover to cover, and kind of went, "Hey, this area sounds good." And then I just flew up there for a long weekend with my boyfriend at the time, who's now my husband, and we would go and see every property in the market in a particular area. And then by the end of the weekend, I'd go, "Oh, I really like that one." So I just bought it. So it was sort of, there wasn't a lot of analysis back then. I think I was more working on, gut instinct. It made sense to the portfolio at the time, and it made sense for me to put that piece of the puzzle into what it was looking at overall what I already owned. So I just didn't overthink it and just went ahead and did it.
Yeah. Okay. That's super interesting because it's so easy to get wrapped up with, and this is probably the problem that we have in this day and age, right? There's so much data, there's so much analytics. You've got RP data pumping out everything. Real estate has its own information. Domain has its own information. You've got
news.com.au
SQM.
every second day saying the property market's going to drop by 35%, and next day it's 78%, and there's always sort of so much conflicting news, so much noise. Whereas I imagine you seem a very calm and very methodical person. So you sort of you knew that was the area you wanted to invest in. You had a reasonable idea of what you could sort of borrow and what sort of yield and what you're looking to achieve and how it fit into the puzzle. So I think that's where the using property as a vehicle, you weren't emotional about, you weren't sort of worrying too much about it. You were saying, okay, here's what because did you have a set goal you were keen to achieve at that stage? Did you have a passive income sort of thing that you were looking at?
Not really. I mean, I knew I had a lot of years ahead of me, and I was really starting out on my career. So it wasn't really about retirement or having a set goal. It was really about building as much as I could. And every year or two, when I sort of had a little bit more equity, I would refinance, unlock that equity, and then say, well, let's look at what I can buy next. So it was really in the building phase in the first decade, sort of in my 20s.
Yeah. So did you have like a set LVR limit that you wouldn't go above, that you would say, you know what, actually, we're going to stick at 70% LVR, or were you just pushing it to 90, or like, what were you thinking? Or were you even not even thinking about that, saying, I can unlock the equity, givey?
Yeah, so it was always 80 was really the limit for me, only because I didn't really want to spend the money on the LMI. And I was fortunate because I'd had sort of a few properties that were growing behind me. I could get that equity out. And when I did a reno or I'd sell a property, it also gave me that extra equity to go and take the next step into something bigger.
Yeah, that's awesome. So when you went from renovation, were you doing bigger and bigger renovations, or was it just purely basic cosmetic? What kind of stuff did you do?
So I did a couple of cosmetic ones to existing properties. And then I went, hey, I'm great at this. I'm going to go and jump in the deep end and build 4 townhouses. So I bought a block of land and then realized I had no idea how to build townhouses. So all I did was go on the council website, check their LEP and DCP, and knew that I was allowed to build townhouses on this block of land. But really, the whole process took me over 18 months to get them approved. There was a lot that I ran into around stormwater issues and around what the council would and wouldn't approve, even though in theory they could approve it. And after the 18 months, it really got to the point where it was getting painful to hold. The market had gone down. I still didn't have any builders that I could trust to work with. And I just got to a point where I was like, no, I need to get out and walk away from this project. So I got the DA approval, but I walked away and lost money.
Was this on property? Is this on a Sydney? This is back in Sydney, is it, or is this still up in Queensland?
No, so anything that I've done to add significant value has been in Sydney. So yeah, this was in the St. George area near where I grew up. Yeah,
I know. Yeah, St. George. Yeah.
Wow.
Gee, I hope you don't. I hope you don't look at that one. Because you probably would have picked that up around 2013. I think you said we were chatting before the show.
Yes. Yeah. Well, actually, it was purchased around 2011 and sold around 2013.
Yeah. Geez. I hope you don't look at that now. What that side is.
What's 4 townhouses worth? Well, so you lost money on it, but you got the DA. Like, do you, I don't know about regret the decision because it's allowed you to learn and blah, blah, blah. But like, would you have kept it knowing what you know now? Would you keep it, or would you continue to sell it and go down that path?
Look, I learnt a lot from it. It was a really good reality check as well as a learning curve for me. And I'm not the sort of person that looks back and feels, I guess, any sort of real regret. I'm more, well, pretty much straight away I jumped into another property. So I'm better to rebound into a new project than I am at sort of digressing over the past.
Yeah. Well, financially, would it have been So I guess the reason I ask is we had someone in the group reach out he wrote a post and he said, look, I just bought this property about 6 months ago. It's in this area. I've had to replace parts of the roof. I've had to do the new water heater. I've had to do minor renovations on it. I've had to sort out the stormwater. I've had to do all this stuff. And I've spent 15, 20, 30 grand on the thing. And it's been very difficult for me. And I'm so sick of it, but I know it's a subdividable site. And I just want to get out though, because it's been so difficult. And, one side of the coin is like, wow, this is overwhelming. There's so much bad stuff that's gone onto it. But then the flip side of it is, well, you've just done all of the hard yards. There's nothing else that's going to break by normal maintenance, right? The roof isn't going to break again because you fixed it, unless you need to fully replace it. Like the store, you've got a new hot water heater, you've got a new aircon. So I guess from your perspective, like was it a good idea to sell it anyway, even though you lost money? Or would you have said, I really should have stuck it out and made it because it would have worked?
Yeah. I think in your example, that investor would now just sit there and do nothing and continue to buy and hold their investment, which makes sense. And, it's just a run of bad luck really for them. Whereas for me, I had almost at the time an insurmountable hurdle in actually then having to build these townhouses without having the experience of building anything from scratch. Yep. So I think at the time it was the right decision for me to walk away and go back to sort of the starting blocks with something, that I could learn from, as opposed to then having to take that leap of faith and find a builder and build and not know if I was building a good product or not know what I don't know.
How did you pick that? What was the process for selecting that type of property in St. George? Like, how did you stumble upon this property?
I think I just got overexcited, saw the huge block size, and saw that I could build a development there. And everyone's talking about being a developer, and I really love property. And I just thought, well, why not? I guess and people have told me along the way, I'm always very optimistic. So I tend to run late to things because I think there's no traffic coming because I'm so optimistic.
So you can do a reform.
It's a good way. It's a good way to look at it.
But if I was looking back, I probably would have told myself not to have done that. There's no chance I would do it again in terms of not really having understood, the hugeness of what I was doing.
Yeah, exactly. You can read as many books as you want, but you need that experience of like hands-on of dealing with and actually finding builders in the real world is very different to like, oh, you just go on the yellow pages and you're good to go, or Google. But what I love about this is it didn't stop you. Like these situations, what you're talking about, I would have stopped so many people from continuing on and said, you know what, screw it, I'm done with property. This is BS. But you were like, no, this is just a speed bump. This is a minor thing. I've lost a little bit of money, but I've made all of this money. So how did you kind of what you said? You went straight into another deal, or what did that look like?
Yeah, so I think there were some pretty, difficult and dark days, but I think I went, well, I need to take a step back and look at what I know, and still my love is properties. So we went into a terrace in the inner west. So something we could live in, something that was, a lot smaller and a lot more manageable. It was an existing property, but we could see that it needed a lot of reno work. And that then enabled me to sort of cut my teeth on being an owner builder, doing a small DA, going through that approval process, and then the CC process of hiring the builders and getting the work done. But it was so much more manageable. And it's what I sort of recommend the people I speak to, if they want to get into development, I would say start small with an extension, sort of a DA.
Unless you've the only reason I wouldn't is where you've got either time or a lot of energy or money, because I think with yourself you're probably sort of getting I tend to agree, like small, particularly that, because you don't know what you don't know. Something you mentioned there, I want to sort of dig a bit more into the owner builder. So you project managed the subcontractors, and how did that process go? Because I imagine with finance, I mean, I know Richard, your partner, was he a broker at that stage?
No. So he had his own corporate job.
Okay.
in sort of fast-moving consumer goods. So not
Yep.
related at all to finance.
Yep.
But he was along for the ride as my partner.
Yep.
We were married by this point. So we, but he's never been as involved in property as I have. So he just sort of holds my hand. If I need him to choose a paint color, he will. But I was referred to these great carpenters, but they said, hey, we only work as carpenters. We don't have a builder's license. So why don't you go and get your own builder? So I went, sure, why not? Which then meant that I was responsible for the build site. And, a story I tell often is they would send me to Bunnings and go, hey, we needed some screws. And I would go and buy 5 packs because I didn't know which ones they wanted. And everything's returnable at Bunnings, right? And then I would go back to the carpenter and go, here's the screws you requested. And they'd be like, hang on, we asked for nails. Why did you bring screws?
That'd be something I'd do too.
Yeah. But I really learned over the course of that sort of year a whole lot about how the houses were put together, about how long it took to do things, from the inside out. I watched them, and we lived in this house, and then I was pregnant at the time as well, which ended up being more and more difficult. But we were right there throughout the whole journey of the house being built and the extension coming together and all the internals and the externals coming together. So it really was a huge amount of learning that I had.
From what I'm gathering, it sounds like you don't do things in half measures. You when you do something, you go full on. Like you're not gonna sort of outsource. You're actually going to get your hands dirty. So I wouldn't surprise if you're actually kind of swinging the hammer as well, sort of with the nails and sort of doing lots of stuff as well
with the screws.
Yeah, one night I had to connect the underfloor heating because no one else was around to do it, and the next day it was being covered up.
Jeez, that's
I just
impressive.
read the instruction manual, had someone check it the next day. It wasn't electrical, it was just sort of some cabling and stuff.
Yeah.
But yeah, I'm not afraid to get in there.
How did the financing go with that particular project? Because knowing a little bit about sort of finance myself, because as soon as you go to a lot of time when you go to a lender or a broker, they'll own a builder, they'll sort of say, well, they'll cap the borrowing capacity at about 60 or 65 or 70%. So how did that process go for you?
So because it was an existing house and still a somewhat functional house, we just got the lending at 80% as an owner-occupied loan. And then the extension work, it probably ended up costing about $150,000, $180,000. So we really just funded that from savings. Then we refinanced at the end and was able to unlock that equity.
Yeah. So how did you slowly but surely progressing. Let's talk about some of the deal. So you've got 2 projects on the go at the moment. Like, what are they like now? Like, what have you progressed to?
Hang on, Joe. Joe's kind of have we missed a whole bunch of learning throughout this process, Mel? Have we jumped ahead too far?
Yeah, I think you've skipped about 8 years. So a lot's happened in those 8 years.
give us a run through. What have you because I think there was another project you did in Inner West around 2015.
So after a couple of these, and I did after the first terrace, I did another one which was even bigger. So it really helped me learn even more. Then I did a couple of flips, had another baby. So it was easy for me to work for myself in a way, and do these projects. Then I built 2 sets of duplexes, one very successful, one not so much. Then I did a joint venture and built some townhouses in the east. Then I decided to sort of scale back. I actually had a bit of a health scare. Richard, my husband, decided to start his own business. He was well and truly bitten by the finance bug, and quit his job to be a mortgage broker. I decided to start my own property management business. COVID happened. Then I bought some sites at the start of COVID. So it was actually a very fortunate time to buy 2 blocks of land. And now I'm building those 2 properties. There we go.
Wow.
That's 8 years in 2 minutes.
And a Ferrari. We got to mention the Ferrari. We've gone from RX-7 to Ferrari. Much faster.
I could talk about cars for just as long, but I won't.
Yeah, exactly. I'm very tempted to. Anyone in the comments who's watching, throw in what section of what Mel just spoke about there would you like to dig deeper in? Because I'm actually interested, while this comes up, I'm interested to hear about, you had a duplex that went well, and then you had a duplex that did not so well, and then you had one that went well. Can you talk to those two? What did they look like? Like, what were some of the things looking back that made this first duplex not do as well, and then what made the next one do even better? How did it kind of look?
So interestingly, it was the first duplex that went well, and the second one that didn't go as well, which is interesting because you expect that really with the learnings from the first one, we should get better. And it really was probably the market was quite a big part of it. That at the time when the second duplex was ready to sell, it really was a poor time in the market, and that was when the elections were happening back 4 or 5 years ago.
Yeah, 2017.
Yeah, and it was the market just the day we marketed it. I think 60 Minutes came out with a story about the market dropping 40%.
Oh, that one.
That day.
That's right.
The infamous one.
Yeah, and also I think I went a little bit too big on the product. So I didn't look at the demographic as much. And in a downturn market, people get pickier, and it wasn't quite what they wanted in that market, even though sort of 5 minutes away when I built my first set of duplexes, it was almost as the identical product, and it sold really, really well. So the market can be fickle, and sometimes it can catch you off guard.
And did building prices change at all? I mean, that's one of the big things right now where people are struggling. The build cost is going up in price with inflation. Was that a factor into it, or was it pretty much the same build cost?
No, it was very much similar build costs, and it was the same builder. We did have a few challenges in the second one around sort of stormwater. We had some problems with the council and the street and having to restore some heritage sandstone. Sometimes every time I do a project, some new little thing will pop up that you don't expect, and it's always some complicated problem that you have to resolve. And sometimes it costs you money and time, and it's just one of these things.
Yeah, I think that's the thing you learn when you're doing like renovations. Probably not so. I mean, correct me if I'm wrong here, but in the sort of renos I've seen and done, renos you typically don't have some massive delays unless you've got suppliers delays, which we may have. But developments, they're the sort of projects that there usually is one or two things that will delay it by maybe, I don't know, 2, 3, 4, 5 months. And there's some people that can occasionally not get away with it, but if they're building a product they've built over and over again, they might be able to not have the delay. Mm-hmm. But particularly where you're building in a newer area or building a new type of products, there'll be one or two things that will throw the time frame out by a little bit.
Yeah, and that's why development is so much riskier than renovation, where ultimately you probably can still live in the property, or you can let it drag out a bit longer and not have those huge holding costs piling up or the market turning on you as much.
Yeah. What were you with these developments with your feasibilities? What were you were you basing it? Where you had comparable sales that you were sort of looking at? Yeah, what did the feasibility look like when you were doing those developments then?
So we've always worked off around about a 20% margin. Mm-hmm. So the feasibility was always, there was a sort of worst case, which was probably more like a break even, and a great scenario, which would be more than 20%. And you'd always hope to land somewhere around the 15 to 25%, I suppose, as a range. And I'm more of a back of the envelope, big picture person, whereas Richard, my husband, is very much into spreadsheets, and he'd have all the scenarios mapped out. So we did go through all that detailed feasibility process, but sometimes you end up, at your worst case scenario. We didn't lose money on the second set of duplexes, but I did essentially work for 18 months for nothing.
Yeah. So opportunity cost is the biggest. Yeah. But that's still not a bad result though, because there's some horror stories out there. People that have really lost money from development. So yes, yeah.
Yeah, well, we lost a Lamborghini with our first development. we count our losses in cars or our gains.
There you go.
Lost a Lamborghini. Hopefully not a Countach.
No, just a Huracan.
Okay.
You've lost me.
That's awesome. So you've had some real difficulties in property, and it just hasn't slowed you down, just hasn't stopped you. Like, what's your kind of mental framework around that? Like, how do you just keep going and keep at it and I know it might sound like it's just every day for you, but I know that there's people out there that, you know, I fall for it as well, where you just like, you know what, actually screw it. Let's just, I'm not going to do it anymore because it's too hard. But what do you have around that?
I just saw a question that said, "Have you had a McLaren?" So no.
Well, there it is.
Haven't.
There's the answer. I haven't got my McLaren yet, so I need to get there, and I'm not going to get there by working 9 to 5.
Yeah, I need one of each in the garage. No, so I think my mindset's always been that I'm super ambitious. So it's always about wanting that little bit more, or not quite feeling like I've got there yet. And really, I have such a love for property. It sort of fits in with my really hands-on approach, where I can add value in lots of different ways. And I've tried other assets. I've tried shares and other things, and they just have not gelled with me. And so for me, it's really just a continuous sort of desire to want to sort of reach for the next project, or get into the next thing. I can't really explain it any more than that.
Yeah, okay. And this is obviously your investment vehicle, right? Outside of the Ferrari, which is the vehicle that you invested in, property's that vehicle for you. I lost my question. I had a great question there. It's gone now.
I'll stop thinking about it, Joe. It'll come back. I wanted to. So with these two most recent sites, what do they look like, and how did you picked up during COVID? So you saw an opportunity there?
Yeah, so both were bought off market. One in the east, which we're building to live in as a home, and one in the inner west, just through an agent contact of mine. And I think it highlights how useful it is sometimes to build those agent relationships, because then they think of you, and they know me as sort of a local small developer. So they got in touch with me and said, "Hey, this site's coming up, and if you can make the numbers work, we'll have a go at putting an offer into the owner." So they're both now at the similar stage of sort of framing up, about to sort of get to lock up. And I think there's a bit of scale there in using the same builder, in sort of being able to order windows from the same company. So they're the two that I'm sort of focused on at the moment, trying to get one finished so I can move in, and one that we can sell and then look for the next project.
Awesome. Found my question. My question was, why property? Why is property the thing that you're after? Like, what is it from, I guess, a numbers perspective? Like, why not invest in shares? It's like, I know it's not like it doesn't fit with you and it hasn't worked. Shares haven't worked for you, but why is it why property is your investment vehicle?
I think it's just because I'm hands-on, and in property, I see three ways to sort of, I guess, make money. One of them is buying well, buying into the right market, buying at the right time, then adding value, whether it is just a reno or changing the floor plan, being able to furnish a property and rent it for a higher rent, being able to knock it down and subdivide, rebuild. There's so many different strategies and things you can do, and then looking at sort of selling it, and hopefully selling it well, marketing it well, presenting it to the market the best that you can. So there's a whole host of ways, I guess, you can build wealth through property, or if you don't sell it, just hold it for a very long time. So it's a very, very powerful way to leverage your time and your money.
Yeah. And my thing is if the banks are willing to lend 80, 90, in some cases 100% of the money, it's you're only putting in $100,000 and you're owning $1 million asset. It's absolutely crazy. And then the banks come back to you and they're like, no, we don't want any of the cash flow. We don't want any of that stuff. We want just a little bit of money back. Like, we just want some interest. We don't want any of your upside. No, we don't care about that. You take all of the upside. We just take a little bit of interest from you. Now, I say a little bit, it's kind of getting a little bit more and more each. I think
I'll become a bank, Joe. I mean, geez, I'm gonna create money that doesn't exist and then lend it to somebody. That sounds pretty good to me. Like, I'll be a bank.
True.
Like, yeah. Anyway,
I think that's how the GFC happened.
Yeah, that's where we went wrong. I'm interested to hear about the Sydney market as well. So you've been a property manager for a number of years now, and your husband's a mortgage broker. So let's dive deep into the property management world and how you're seeing the Sydney market, because the the Melbourne market, the Sydney market has a bit of a stigma at the moment, where it's like don't even go there because it's one, too expensive, and two, it's on the decline. What are we meant to do? So I'd love to unpack that. What we're going to do is go to our sponsored post, and then we'll jump straight into learning about the Sydney market, if that's cool.
There's nothing worse than going into a situation unprepared, especially when that situation is purchasing one of the most expensive assets of your life against a trained property expert in the form of a real estate agent. It's a scary thought, but it is a skill that can be taught. Do you want to learn how to become fully prepared when buying a property so you can get out there, buy your dream home or investment property without the fear of actually messing it up? Scott Agate, the founder and expert property negotiator at Hello House, has been helping people buy their properties by stepping in and negotiating with the agents and saving his clients tens of thousands, and in some cases hundreds of thousands of dollars. Scott has now decided to share all that he's learned over the past 28 years in real estate, so you can go out there and do the exact same thing on how to find a property, analyze that property, negotiate on that property, and transact on it to get the best results. He's created the Get Buyer Ready course, which is a step-by-step guide on how you too can become an expert property negotiator. It's the easy way of how you can avoid all of these agent games and get the best purchase price on that dream home or your investment property. The course is in short bites for busy people with no fluff at all. Just all the information you need to get buyer ready and secure that next property with confidence at the best price. Scott has been kind enough to give our community a massive discount with the link below. Sign up today before you even think about putting an offer on that next property, and it will be one of the best decisions you ever make.
Here we go. So I think that's an interesting course we got from young Scott. But I saw some of the questions that popped through, and I love loving some of these questions. Let's talk. Let's see. You were just talking about. So this is Brendan, and he's a regular watcher of the show. He said, "How do you measure enough? What is the break even? Therefore, when you start doing things because you are not able to be. You have to."
Wow, you really nailed that. Really nailed that question there, Jeff.
The order of the question, though. Therefore, when you start doing things because you are able,
you don't have to. You don't have to do them. You do things because you can, not because you have to. Right?
I was just reading it as is, though. I've been stitched up, Joe. But yeah, that's an interesting question. Like, how do you measure enough? Like, is there ever going to be enough? Is it going to be a bit of a game of Monopoly?
Well, for me, I guess property and even going into work in my office every day, it doesn't feel like work. It feels like a choice. It feels like, I know, I'm just going about doing what I love as opposed to something that I have to do. So I think it's fantastic to be able to choose something that you're passionate about so that work isn't really work anymore. But at the same time, I am, we're just hit our 40s and looking at potential exit strategies over the next 10 years. Looking at, when is enough, and how do we then prioritize our family over maybe our businesses or that wealth building that's driven us for the last 2 decades.
And what was there a moment? Was it like, is this just a gradual progression that we go through as investors, that we go hard initially and then start to turn to those things and think about it? What did it kind of evolve for you? How did it evolve for you?
So I think it really now comes down to delayed gratification. And it's not something that was put into those terms when I was younger, but it was a bit of an inherent thing to save and to try and, put away things for the future. And maybe the car is a good example of us now sort of reaching some of our goals and being able to do things that we enjoy, and spend money on something that's not going to generate potentially an income, but really something that will make us happy.
And by car, what are we talking about? What car are we talking about?
So we ordered we got talked into it somehow. We weren't going to buy such an expensive Ferrari, but we ended up ordering a brand new F8 Tributo, which arrived earlier this year. And it's kind of like having a third child now. I sort of spend a lot of time with the car.
I'm gonna have to look this up. Like,
What do you do with the
yeah,
car?
I feel so out of my depth with these cars. I'm just like, I suppose cars is not ever excited me. Like if somebody
Well, just
were to buy me
picture a Ferrari, Jeff. Picture a Ferrari
I know what a
in your
Ferrari
head,
is.
a red one. That's exactly what it looks like. It's
Yeah.
exactly
Maybe I
that.
have
It's
to put a
the-
picture of the car on the screen.
Yeah.
It
But
is
yeah,
exactly
I'm the
that.
sort of person I really like to understand the nuances. There you
Oh,
go.
here we go.
Of each and every sort of different topics, because I'm not sort of, I like to dig deep. But the interesting thing though, I wanted to,
Where
so
is
when
it?
you say exit strategies,
It's like a photo of my child. Hang on, it's the opposite.
Yeah.
There we go. The red one is ours.
I like it.
There
The
you
thing
go.
that not worries me, the thing that concerns me about these cars is I just lose my license every 2 months, because how do you actually go the speed? I mean, this is not a rhetorical question, but how do you go the speed limit in these cars? Because I've been in a couple of them, and these people they're just gently touching the pedal, and they're going like 80, 90, 100. I'm like, geez, how do you?
It's a fair
Anyway.
question. How do you do that?
You
I
don't
couldn't
get
do
to
this
drive it that much, really. But it's funny because the car's become a bit of a social experiment for me. It's actually become a means to meet other people and sort of, people that are entrepreneurial or that are into investing that normally I wouldn't have met, normally.
Yeah, the
So
conversation
it's-
sort of bridging.
Yeah, and it's something that drives conversation. You've got something in common all of a sudden,
Yeah.
and it's become, its own little sort of world.
Yeah, it would be. So exit strategy, what does is that sort of talking from a business perspective, from a property, or both? Like what does that conversation look like?
Yeah, so we got into our businesses because we loved sort of property so much, and we branched into these separate areas because for us it was like, well, we've done it all these years, and who better to sort of help our clients than us that have sort of, I guess, lived through it for so long. But now we're getting to a point where it is sometimes a little bit taxing that our kids are getting older and they need more time, and we're still spending a good, 10, 12 hours a day on the business.
Yeah.
And so I'm looking to leverage the businesses a little bit more in terms of still being there and overseeing it, but not being in the business, more working on the business.
Interesting. Yeah, I feel like we could go down a massive rabbit hole from the business perspective, and what does that look like? Just hiring good quality operators that are able to run both of the business, and giving them a larger stake of equity.
Yeah, so it does come down to giving staff some equity so that they have skin in the game, and also just making sure that your processes and the overarching objectives of the business are very clear, so that as the director and the owner, my views are passed down based on my experiences. And because I've got the interstate portfolio, we still hold a number of properties around the country. I've dealt with all different property managers and the models and the way they operate. It's made it very clear to me what I want, I guess, as a business owner, which then means I just have to pass it down as succinctly as possible.
Yeah, that's probably one of the key challenges for a business owner, and I know Joe's going to go through this himself, and I've seen him is actually sort of laying those processes and principles of the founder or the key person of the business, and helping the people that are sort of also sort of becoming more seen, taking more responsibility. It's an interesting kind of dilemma, because I struggle to let go of things, so that's kind of or
Me
at
too.
least processes and sort of thing, and sort of seeing but it's kind of essential. Otherwise, it's kind of like having a property manager in your property. Like, would I go and change the toilet of my property, or would I go and collect the rent? No, I wouldn't. I'm going to hire a professional to do that for me, because they're the best people to do that. I'm not the best person to do that.
Yeah, exactly. And it comes down to leverage, the best use of your time, and being able to make the most of your time while still, I guess, gaining the most out of those decisions.
Shall we
comes
dive
down
into
to leverage? I'm interested about the Sydney market, Jeff. I don't know about you, But
Oh, yeah.
I'm
I mean, if for people who've seen me comment, like they know that I don't like the Sydney market at all. I mean, I'm being sarcastic because whenever I say something, it's people kind of throw a bit of a jibe at me and say, yeah. I mean, I do quite like Sydney. Grew up there, but so yeah. Tell us about what are you seeing as a property manager, and what do you sort of see sort of pockets that you follow quite closely from a rents and from a how's it holding up from a capital sort of growth thing as well?
Yeah.
What are you sort of seeing?
So we've had quite a bit of a shift in the last 3 months. So winter, things were fairly quiet. And then all of a sudden in the last 3 or 4 months, things have shot up in the lower end of the market. So this is really only Sydney Metro where I operate. So about 15 kilometres around the CBD. So inner west, inner east, lower north shore mostly. We found that the lower end has really disappeared. So any properties that are sub 400, 450 even, have now reversed to what happened at the start of COVID. So the COVID, everybody left and all the smaller properties became really hard to rent and dropped probably about 20%. And now they've probably gone up over the last 6 months, probably 25 to 30%. Because everyone's moved back out from, the home or sharing, or they've come back in from overseas or interstate. And so suddenly that whole segment of the market has really shifted. But what we're finding in houses is that they never really fell so much. And then because we had all this rain in Sydney and because of winter, they became less popular. So they haven't fallen. They've probably gone up now a little bit as well, but definitely not as much as houses. And sometimes we have, not as much as units, the smaller units. And we have owners going, but don't I have, isn't the market shooting up? Shouldn't we get a huge rent increase? And it really sort of depends. It's not for everybody.
What the growth of rentals is not for everyone. What type of assets are growing a lot? Like if you were to own a asset, regardless of price, from a rental perspective, what would it be?
Sounds like a unit.
So what I was talking about was the sort of the actual rental value, but I think the asset value, the underlying value of the property, has obviously all gone up through COVID. But now I'm seeing because of the huge costs in building or renovating, the huge labor and the lack of supply, that what's gone out of favor a little bit are properties that maybe need a little bit of reno down the track. So what I would look at buying is something really well located that's maybe a little bit of an ugly duckling, that then you could hold for 5 years and then renovate. So when the market comes back around again and it becomes cheaper and easier to renovate, then those properties will shoot up again in value.
Are we sort of because you would have your finger on the pulse quite a lot here? Are builders starting to get a little more available? Because I live in the sort of south coast of sort of Sydney or southern parts of Sydney, and I'm starting to see builders. There's properties that are going up a lot quicker, and they're making a lot more progress a lot quicker. So is that sort of crunch on getting a builder to come in and or even a renovation, is that starting to ease up, you're finding, or is that just me wishful thinking?
Not as much. I'm experiencing on the ground, and maybe it's just my builder's still very busy. The complaint I'm hearing a lot is that the staff are going on holidays, or they've already started switching off for Christmas, or it rains for half an hour and they go home. That maybe COVID has made people a little bit, a bit more relaxed.
That's hilarious.
Value the time, Joe.
Yeah, I do have a friend that's in construction. He said like salaries have gone absolutely gangbusters, where he'd be paying someone $100,000 and now it has to be $150,000 as opposed to just a little, well, not a little, $100,000 is a lot of money, and that has to be passed on. That has to be passed on to the end product, right? That is the cost of doing business. So it's interesting to see how that flows on. We have a question here that is, what is the yield that Mel is seeing? What kind of yields are you seeing on these properties? Because this is one of the things, right? This is one of the questions that comes up a lot is, Sydney's not somewhere to buy because the yields are so low. Are there kind of better yielding assets? And is it worth buying a better yielding asset in Sydney versus something that's going to grow more? What are your thoughts on the yield side of things, the yield story for Sydney?
Yeah, so I'm a property management specialist, so my finger's on the sort of pulse for property management, but it's harder for me to speak to the actual property value. However, from what I can see, yield in these sort of units have got to be improving because the asset value has come down and the rents have gone up. So that gap has definitely shrunken from a couple of years ago to now.
Yeah, that's the plus side. That's the plus side of lowering values. Your yield's going up.
Yeah, so if you buy now, you'll get a better return.
Yeah. I like it. Okay. And what is the typical value for a 2-bedroom unit in Sydney? Like, what should we be expecting? Well, Sydney's a bit broad, but I don't know. It would be good to understand, like, a generalized, is Sydney a 2% yield? Is it a 3% yield? Is it 3.2%? I don't know.
Maybe let's look at an example. Like we have a client that purchased a little house in Camperdown. So it's an inner city, west suburb. It's near the unis. It's a very popular rental suburb, lots of cafes. So I think they paid 1.2 for it. And we're getting $750 a week in rent.
Okay. So
the yield
3.9% yield. Is
it?
Sorry.
Hang on.
No, it doesn't.
Joe's doing public maths. And he's
hang on.
3.25. 25.
So that's probably not too bad. Whereas Sydney, typically for houses, would probably be below 3.
Yeah.
I mean, then you look at a unit. You'd probably get a nice 2-bedroom unit in a eastern suburbs market like Randwick for maybe $2 million. Oh, sorry, $1 million, not 2, 1. And you would probably be able to rent that for probably around the same sort of $750, maybe $800 a week. So your yield's a little bit better, but then you get less land. So it's a bit of a comparison on what is a better investment long term.
Yeah, and it's timing as well. Like where in your portfolio? What stage in your portfolio are you at? Do you need a better yielder? Do you need a better growth? Do you need more land? And can you do value add on that land? But I guess either way, if you're buying an inner Sydney apartment or a inner Sydney, townhouse, you can't really do too much value add outside of a renovation.
Yeah, I mean, there is to a terrace. There's a fair bit more you can do in terms of an upstairs extension or a knock out the back and make it an open plan. But yes, that's something I would do down the track because of the current situation. But it does give you those options and some potential.
Yeah, nice. And what are your thoughts of? I guess one of the things is a lot of people have left town, left Sydney. They've gone to the regions, and this is just this is just generalizing based on what you see on the media. How do you feel about a big influx of people coming back to Sydney, and now that it's going to kind of suffer out in some of those further out locations when people realize like you still have to go to work in the cities? Is that something you're seeing a little bit, or it's not something you think about? Or, I don't know.
Yeah, I mean, I think I see the market has definitely tightened. So where there used to be maybe 40 houses in a suburb for rent, now there might be only 25. So definitely it's a demand and supply relationship. So when the supply is lower, it's going to put upward pressure on prices. So definitely I think the exodus caused a gap, and then property rents dropped. And now you're seeing the result of them all coming back in. And that's why there's so much rent growth.
Yeah, I think the interesting thing as well is, and I don't know that we've seen a lot of it play out yet, but you've got the immigration, people sort of moving into Australia, and typically they're going to go to your places like your Sydney, your Melbournes, your Brisbane. So yes, they might go to Adelaide, they might go to Perth as well, and depending on their visa, they might go to sort of Hobart. But yeah, I think that's potentially where, but it's then how sustainable is that sort of thing. But if you're having sort of immigration come into the bigger cities, does that then sort of put pressure on even the local renters which then, as you say, supply and demand? Is if there's more demand and sort of subsequently supply doesn't come on because of building costs, then rents probably are likely to rise.
Yeah, and I think we've only seen a portion of that immigration come in the last 6-12 months. I think there's a lot more of it to come.
Yeah, we kind of need. I'm interested to know. I want to get back to your developing sort of. So when you're developing, are you because it sounds like you sell a lot of product. Do you ever sort of or is there ever a time where you look to keep some of those, or is it dependent on the deal? Okay, I suppose.
Yeah, I suppose the ones I've done so far, it's made sense to sell and reuse that capital for the next project.
Yep.
And we do something called rent developing. We have till this house is built. So we're basically using our capital instead of rent vesting, where I'm using it for development. So I'm developing with it, but I still rent. And it makes a lot of sense for me because instead of buying a home where I just sit and wait for the value to rise, I actually take that money and do something active instead of passive with it, and can grow that capital.
Have you have you bought that domain name?
No, I should trademark the word.
I was gonna, yeah. The only problem I would say is it might arise some interest from the ATO, the rent developer, because they might sort of say, well, are you depending on the capital gains with that sort of thing. So yeah, but rent developer, that's a new term, because there's all these kind of rentrepreneur, or like entrepreneur, like there's solopreneur, there's all these kind of new funky terms they're throwing out there these days.
Well, yeah, I'd love to talk to that rent developing strategy a little bit, because I don't know, like it's very interesting. Like, so what do? You buy a site, develop it, and then move into it for 6 months and live in it 6 months, a year, 2 years. And then you're like, actually, you know what? I want to move on. I don't like, it's not new anymore. I want to sell it and move on to the next lot.
Well, we don't really, I buy it as a company. So as a project, it's not one that I'm going to live in. The house that we're building is going to be a home for us, just because we thought we'd settle down with the kids and give them a pool and a proper place, because they've moved around with us a bit. But yeah, no, the rent developing strategy is more about being able to utilize the funds to add value to it in a development, while renting and sort of not having to have those funds tied up.
Okay. I understand. I was going more down one of the strategies you hear people utilizing, and I think it's a great thing to start out with, is buying a house or developing a house and then living in it and not having to pay the capital gains tax on certain things. But that's a whole new world. We don't need to talk about tax side of things. It's going too deep, but find it very interesting, an interesting way to go about building wealth. So in terms of the development side of things, like we're in one of the hardest times, I feel like, if you read the media, in development. How did you go about actually building, and was this a concern that the building prices were going to skyrocket and you were going to actually lose money? Like, how did you factor that into your feasibility? Because, you know, these sites take, months and many months to get.
Well, I think that the feasibility at the time has kind of gone out the window. The build costs have gone up, but at the same time, the land value and the finished product costs have gone up. So luckily, the equation has continued to balance itself in that sense. But really, at the time, there was no way of predicting what was going to happen and the impact of COVID on the market. So all you can do at the time is build your feasibility based on the existing information, and then hang on and sort of hope that the market, stays strong.
I love that. I love that you spent the past 20 years building up all this knowledge, resources, tools, tips, and tricks, and then the end result is hope and pray. Just hope and pray that the prices continue to go up. No, yes, I know that's not what you're not saying.
You get a good product that you hold on to, and then hope and pray with the good product in your hand.
Yeah.
Yes.
I think the thing that's you're sort of getting at, and I know Joe was being a bit facetious, but is that you can't control what the market does. The market will do, like, inflation could continue to sort of rise or stay as it is, and if it does, they may continue to increase interest rates, but I think the interesting thing you've probably done is you've focused on building a product that matches very well to the demographic, regardless Like you're not going out and building something a McMansion for that particular area. You're building a very sort of a product that a lot of the market's going to be able to buy comfortably and will want to buy. So regardless of whether interest rates continue to rise a little bit, there'll still be a good amount of demand for this type of products, and whether it might come back 5 or 10%, but yeah.
Yeah, and my specialty in a way has been sort of the higher end of the market and buying in markets that are fairly robust, I suppose, and understanding those demographics and knowing what the market wants in a finished product is very important.
Yeah, I was going to say, how important is that to choosing the right end product? Like, is it because this is something I think not many people think too much about and put too much energy in. They're like, I'm going to build a house. I just need to build a house. But how important is it to create, stone bench tops for people that want stone bench top versus, just a laminate thing?
Yeah, well, I touched on that my duplex that didn't go so well. There was a bit of a mismatch between sort of probably what the market wanted and the product that I built. So there is definitely a huge correlation between finding, how successful a project is and what you put into it. So for me now, I've sort of gotten to know my finished product, I suppose, and know the areas where that product, I guess, will fit the demographic. And even in my own home that I'm building, I know it's not going to be a forever home. I'll sell it down the track. So I look at, well, this is the area and it's not exactly what I want in the home. It's what, that future family that's going to live in it is going to want.
And is the best way to do that is simply sort of going to a lot of open for inspections and sort of understand. I mean, as a property manager, you know it very well anyway, but is for the average person.
Yeah, and have conversations with real estate agents, find out, what their buyers want, or, go to a house that sold well and say to the agent, what did people like about this house? What do people not like about a particular house? Just try to pick an area and do everything you can to understand that area.
Yeah. Yeah. And also ask property managers, right? You guys are on the coalface of, I imagine you pick up the phone to investors, savvy investors that ask those type of questions. Like, what is this end product? What is selling well? What is renting well? Because what is renting well is also what people actually want in that space.
Yeah. And we get a couple of buyers agents, a lot of clients and contacts that I have contact me saying, hey, I'm thinking about buying this house. What do you think? And I'll always give them a list of pros and cons. Like I'll say, well, there's no parking in the street and this property doesn't have parking. It's going to limit the number of tenants that are going to want to rent it. Yep. Or, this is a pet-friendly property and it's great for pets and we've got a whole heap of people that, have small pets that want it. So this is going to be a real advantage. It's just those sometimes things that you don't quite think about when you're buying a property, but your property manager is going to know what will rent well.
Or even for example, potentially the last 12, 18 months, the good old the extra study or the Zoom room, because and is the sort of area that somebody buying a white collar professional who do a lot of work from home, in which case the Zoom room may be more important, or maybe it could be a trend. Who knows?
Yeah, and we've always got the properties on our books that when they become vacant, we go, no problem, we'll be able to rent this straight away in the first open. And those that we go, oh no, this is going to be a little bit of a challenge. And you really want the first type of property, but sometimes when you're buying it, it's hard to tell without that help.
Yeah, definitely.
Love that. Yeah, this has been an awesome conversation. This has given me some things to think about, but I guess the enduring theme throughout all of this is, property sucks sometimes. Like, it sucks. Things happen, accidents, things out of your control happen. Interest rates rise, properties go vacant, but you've just endured and you've kept going and going and putting the effort in and getting awesome results from it because you've just compounded the results. Is there anything that we haven't covered that you wanted to kind of tick off? Because I know we spoke about a whole heap of stuff, but I don't know. I'm kind of just cautious of your time. We're an hour and a half in.
Yeah, well, I guess what you were saying just then is that it's not always easy, right? There's going to be difficult days and challenging times, but if it was easy, everybody would be doing it, and then you wouldn't be able to make the money and the profits that you can. So you've just got to endure through those tough times, and there's always spanners are always going to get thrown at you. So part of the whole journey is, sticking in there and also being consistent and having some faith in that, it's a long game, and that over time it will, the market will change, the cycles will come back. And if you're consistent and you keep at it, you'll see results.
Yeah, we got some Q&A. Should we? We'll throw to a couple of these. I do want to be respectful of your time, but we probably got time for about 3 or 4. So do you help? I think the answer is probably yes, but do you help people with project managing renos?
Yes and no. Depends on the client.
The answer's
and
no.
project.
Yeah.
I will take
Throw in
them
the mix
on
there.
often for clients of our property management business.
Yeah.
So if I know we're going to manage it afterwards, or if they're existing clients, it makes it an easier relationship. So yes and no.
Yeah, it's
very hard to manage a renovation. Like it's not an easy thing. So like if you
and
are
it's
reaching out,
very hard to find someone who will do it and know what they're doing and do it successfully and communicate well.
Yeah, and at the best price as well, because anyone can get carpets, paint, and flooring, but there's one person that's going to get it for 15 grand, and there's one person that's going to get it for 35 grand, and they don't care, right? So it's very important.
Yeah, and being a property manager really helps, because I'm maybe painting half a dozen houses a year, and then I've got that relationship, which then makes it easier to do an extra couple of houses.
Yeah,
and they're willing as well on time. They're like, okay, look, I'll skip, John down the road because you consistently do work with me, so I'm willing to be quicker and I'll delay them and I'll put you forward first.
Yeah, it's the relationship.
Yeah, love that.
We've got do you have? I think we covered this a little bit, but this first. So, do you have a good exit plan development that's going to cost you down the track? Put a bow on it and sell. I think that's probably the.
Yeah, I get it. I guess it's what I've done, which is, sometimes I have to walk away for sanity's sake, right? So if you know that it's going badly, then I guess you have to consider all your different options and say, do you hold on and will you make less of a loss now than down the track? And if the answer is yes, then maybe you should just walk away, count your blessings and then try again on a different project.
Yeah, because often I find it's the value of time as well, because time and also your energy, because,
opportunity cost.
Yeah, if you're going to spend, if it's going to result in potentially even a relationship breakdown or something like that, how is that project, is forcing that square peg into a round hole really worth the sort of, the things that are probably worth more than money? Is something that people may not consider or may not.
Yeah, and my health scare was a big one as well, because I had an autoimmune thing flare up, and probably related to the stress of those developments, made me then, I suppose, reassess what was important. So there's definitely other things that are more important than money.
Yeah. Speaking of time and money, let's I think we could cover off. There's plenty of questions people would love to show off. Maybe one more question. There was one on software for development or due diligence. But if somebody has a burning question they want to ask, we'll give it 30 seconds. There's still plenty of people watching. So, but whilst we're doing that, Joe, do you want to give Mel an opportunity? Oh, he already.
Well, yeah. Here is actually, sorry, I'm repeating this one. No, it would be good to ask if there is anything that you use. How do you oh god, I'm clicking back to all. Yeah, no, here it is here. Do you use any software for development or due diligence? Like how do you crunch the numbers for the due diligence? Or is do you have a special software or a special spreadsheet?
No, so really it's Excel, and my husband forcing me to sit down and put the numbers in.
Yeah, he builds the model. He's done it himself 100 times. He's like, no, you, to show that you're in this as well, you need to enter in the loan.
It's only as good as the inputs.
Here you go, garbage in, garbage out, right?
But it's the experience and the previous examples and projects I've done that then give me sort of, I guess, figures that I can use.
Yeah. Yeah, I love that. Well, how can people reach out to you, learn a little bit more about what you're doing, and yeah.
Yeah, so my business is Progressive Property. So it's progressiveproperty.com.au. And my email and mobile number are on the website. So they're welcome to reach out. And the mortgage broking side, which is Richard's business, is freedomfunding.com.au.
Freedom Funding, great name. Love that.
Yeah, not
Yeah,
freedom
and Progressive
fighting,
Property.
freedom funding.
No, yeah, you'd hope so. A little bit more mortgage broking focused. And in terms of like clients, are there any particular clients that you guys, I guess, property investors, right? Anyone that has a property in Sydney from a property management side of things, or looking to buy in Sydney? So if you do have any questions about Sydney, the Sydney market, if you're thinking about getting into it, reach out.
Yeah, absolutely.
And then from the lending side of things, any particular client that you work with, or is it just, I don't know?
Richard works with,
Yeah, Richard tends to get a lot of investors because we've been doing all this investing for so long. You know, it's quite hard actually to find a mortgage broker who's got the 20 years of investing experience. So he ends up getting a lot of people that love his story and that really then trust in the advice because we've been there and done it.
Yeah, yeah, and this is a very great question, comment here. Inspirational, and I think that's exactly what this story is. You've gone from buying a 1-bedroom apartment in Sydney for $105,000 with a $7,000 down, to now crushing it and running 2 property businesses in property management, mortgage broking. And you know, the cherry on top is you're driving a bloody Ferrari. Like, if that doesn't signal something, that it's not gonna do it for you. But it's been a crazy wild ride, and you've done incredibly well. It is an inspirational story. Thank you very much for sharing that with us.
Thanks very much, Joe and Jeff.
Yeah, and just appreciate that we're able to have these conversations with people, because it's fantastic to thanks to everybody for tuning in. And if you're on YouTube, drop a comment and do all the good stuff. And if you do have a property in the inner sort of Sydney sort of area, reach out to Mel, because hopefully you're not going to be too busy. I know you're a boutique team, so you might get a few inquiries now, but hopefully I'm sure you'll be able to. But, yeah, all the best for those 2 developments as well, and keep us in the loop how it goes. I know they'll go very well. So, and the comments, the thanks are flooding in. So, and thanks. Wonderful here, Fremo, who looks back at the serviette kind of investor. Is that? I think that's probably Karen. I think that's Karen.
Yeah,
that's Anita. Sorry, Anita.
Back of the napkin. Well, and this is the thing: if it doesn't work on the back of the napkin, then it's not going to work with your big old feasibility study. If it doesn't work on the back of the napkin. So I'm all for it. You got to spend a couple of minutes.
And if it doesn't feel right, then it's probably not going to be something that you'll love doing.
Yeah. Love it. Okay, well, let's wrap it up. Thank you very much, Mel, and let's go buy a property. See you later.
See ya. Thank you.